Well, the President of the United States wanted to know about, hey, why is everybody talking about me colluding?
He said Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election. So why didn't he do something about Russian meddling?
Justice isn't blind anymore. Justice will be dead if something doesn't happen here, because this is what Democrats are pandering to, a base absolutely obsessed with a farcical hoax story.
President Trump gearing up for his speech at CPAC this week as Republicans gain ground of the midterm polls.
You know what's happening is people are seeing it affect their bottom line. It's good politics when people feel better about their personal lives.
As the March 5th deadline looms for a deal on DACA, the Supreme Court may step in as soon as today.
Senate hopeful Mitt Romney getting a huge endorsement from Washington. President Trump tweeting his support, saying, quote, he will make a great senator and has my full support.
Just watch.
Hi. Where does Bruno Mars get a horn section from? Like,
They're
is he
so
great,
good.
or
He's
is he
such a great performer. And he has all these dancers.
Right. And he's also a very good dancer.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah, that's
he
right.
is. He's the lead one.
Right.
Well, listen, there will be no Uptown Funk today because here in New York City it's going to be 60 degrees, and tomorrow it's going to be 75 degrees in the middle of February. What the heck's that?
Central Park's going to be packed.
And everyone at News Corp is wearing a tank top to work today.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that a mandate?
I saw
You
the
missed
email.
the memo.
Well, yeah, we were already at work, so we already had gotten dressed.
You know, I've never seen that. Usually it's like there's going to be no steam in the building on a Saturday night.
You should charge your phone, because it's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about the election meddling. That was the big story at the end of the week last week, and it continues because it was proven that 13 Russians tried to interfere with the election in 2016 while President Obama was in office. So our current president, President Trump, is asking, why didn't he take action?
Yeah, he tweeted this out yesterday, President Trump did. Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election, so why didn't he do something about Russian meddling? Well, you know what, Mr. President? That's a great point, because we know historically that President Obama told reporters after the election that he had told Putin in September before the election, I know what you're doing, knock it off. And yet when this narrative goes forward about the Russians were involved and the Obama administration knew about it, the president knew about it when he said this about 3 weeks before the election.
There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I'd advise Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes.
It turns out he did stop whining, made his case, and he won. Oops, how did that happen? If you look at the president's track record, it has been anything but strong when it comes to Russia. Remember, the first thing he did is take the missile defense system out of Eastern Europe. President Obama. And then, of course, he made that statement to win re-election against Mitt Romney. Hey, the 1980s called, they want their foreign policy back, when he said Russia was our #1 geopolitical foe. And as Mitt Romney runs for Senate, I'm sure this is going to come up again. And now this comes out that Russia was working on our system since 2014. And as was tweeted over the weekend, people are saying, well, President Trump knew he was running for president in 2014. No, he didn't. Since 1980, he thought about running for president. No one really thought he was running for president when he actually declared, and he came down that escalator up until 48 hours before.
Right.
So they couldn't have been saying Donald Trump is our guy, because he wasn't anybody's guy except for NBC, because he hosted The Apprentice.
But here's the thing, ultimately. Barack Obama was the president of the United States when Russia was meddling with our election, trying to sow discord. So why didn't he, as the chief executive of the country, stop it? And now, fast forward to now, and what's the narrative become? Forget about the fact that it happened on Obama's watch. Now it is, well, you know, it looks like the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians, which there is no evidence, absolutely none, that happened. All we found out on Friday with the Mueller indictment was there was this place called the Troll Factory, spent about $100,000 and just put out a bunch of Facebook ads. That's it.
Well, Congressman Joaquin Castro, Democrat from Texas, many think he might be running for president. He compares the Russia meddling to 9/11 in this op-ed. He writes, while this current situation is not marked by catastrophic bloodshed, destruction, or debt, we've entered a new generation of warfare on America's national security. September 11th, 2001 was a moment in our history when a non-state actor effectively identified one of our nation's greatest security vulnerabilities in the airline industry.
Keep in mind, too, it's not the president is not like he hasn't done anything about Russia. Remember the speech in Poland? He gave him a brushback pitch. Remember the fact that there was one president who sold the Ukrainians lethal weapons to defend themselves, and it was this president. And in November 2017, he says, the president, he agrees with U.S. intelligence community that Russia meddled in the election. I would love to see stronger action. I sense it's coming, but I think this president, if anybody knows anything about him, and I think we all know him pretty well, they have not said, let's get to the bottom of this. They have said, you're an illegitimate president who's colluded with Russia to win an election. And this president says, you're hurting my administration and you're hurting my credibility. And that's what he sees. Until we can get through this, you're not going to see massive reprisals at Russia. Imagine if he did. You know what the rhetoric would have been? Why? President Trump is overcorrecting because he colluded with Russia to begin with, and now he's going to show to everyone he didn't by hitting with these sanctions.
Well, the rhetoric on the other side is amazing. You know, yesterday we played you Jerry Nadler's sound where he compared the Russian meddling to Pearl Harbor. And Ainsley, as you were just pointing out, is Joaquin Castro comparing it to September 11th, where
2,700 people died?
Almost 3,000 people died. Dan Bongino was on the couch about 30 minutes ago, and he said, expect this kind of rhetoric to ratchet up from the Democrats.
Listen, this was very serious, okay? Russia's a geopolitical foe. Everybody understands that. Let's get that out of the way. Nobody should be apologizing for Russia. Nobody on this set is. But comparing a series of Facebook ads designed to change people's minds in an election, comparing that to the buildings that got knocked down just miles from here is beyond disgraceful. And what's sad is you can expect this kind of literally insane rhetoric to ratchet up because this is what Democrats are pandering to, a base absolutely obsessed with a farcical hoax story. There's no facts to back it up, so hyperbole is all they have.
So what happened on Friday was the Robert Mueller indictment came out. 13 Russian nationals who will never wind up getting tried in American courts were indicted along with 3 corporations. What's interesting is Paul Sperry, well-respected investigative journalist, apparently spoke to a veteran FBI official who said the Russians' indictment was simply a publicity stunt. Robert Mueller and company had to essentially justify their existence, and so they came up with that. And in the words of Gateway Pundit, it's just a big nothing burger.
All right. Well, if you hear the phone ringing, it's probably coming from ABC. 25,000 people have called that network to complain about what Joy Behar said. She was mocking the vice president's love of Christ and Christian faith. Listen to this.
It's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you. That's different. That's called mental illness, if I'm not correct. I'm hearing voices.
Yeah, I remember Oprah comes out the next day and says, oh, why am I not running for president? Because I think that God would have told me to, and he hasn't yet.
Right.
So, okay, Oprah Winfrey mentally ill. Won't you joyless?
Or the majority of Americans, or the world. All right, so we talked to the vice president on the border on Friday, and we asked him what he thought about her comments. Listen to this.
When I heard that ABC had a program that likened my Christianity to mental illness, I just couldn't be silent. My Christian faith is probably the most important thing in my life. I do try and start every day reading the Bible. My wife and I try and have a prayer together before I leave the house every morning. But I do think I'm a very typical American. I think people of all different faith traditions cherish their faith in God, and to have ABC have a forum that spoke in such demeaning terms, I think it's evidence of how out of touch some in the mainstream media are with the faith and values of the American people.
Well, Joy Behar came out and said she was joking. We asked you what you thought, and our email machine pretty much has melted. Cynthia said, this woman is so mean-spirited on so many levels, I don't understand how she is still on the air.
Paul emailed us and said, we pray for our country every day. She preys on our country every day. Different spelling of pray.
And this is what I was referring to before, only this is Tim. Oprah says Jesus hasn't told her to run for president. Is Oprah mentally ill, too? According to Behar, if so, Mike Pence and Oprah can't get a gun. So if the background check is correct.
So anyway, let us know what you think about this. Email us friends@foxnews.com.
All right, let's hand it over to Jillian, who has some headlines for us. Jillian?
That's right. Good morning to you guys. Let's start off with this, an update here on Florida. Today, busloads of grieving students from Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School will march on Florida's Capitol, demanding changes to gun safety laws. Their demonstration coming hours after a judge ruled the Florida shooting suspect's childhood records can go public. The documents revealing allegations that Nicholas Cruz lived in a home filled with abuse and neglect. Meantime, Stoneman Douglas High will reopen in phases starting Friday. Classes will likely resume next week. The building where the killings took place will be demolished. The FBI now joining the desperate search for a missing 5-year-old boy in Kansas. According to his stepmother, Lucas Hernandez was last seen inside his home on Saturday afternoon. When she woke up from a nap, she says he was gone and the back door was open. Police do not suspect Lucas was kidnapped. According to local reports, a relative called Child Protective Services last year, concerned about the child's well-being. A massive manhunt underway for an inmate who just escaped jail for a 6th time. Tennessee police say Philip Andrew Marshall busted through a Bedford County jail vent. Previously, he's used a rope made of bed sheets to rappel down a wall. Before that, he just walked out by a door that was left open by an employee. Marshall is wanted for nonviolent charges. His first stint in jail was for evading police. The U.S. men's hockey team advancing to the Olympic quarterfinals overnight. Harvard's Ryan Donato sparking the win with 2 goals as the Americans hand Slovakia a 5-1 loss. Up next, the unbeaten Czech Republic late tonight. The United States could use a boost, falling behind in the medal count, sitting in 5th place with 12.
We're in 5th place?
5th place. I know.
Yeah, I mean, they predicted we'd get 20 Olympics, but so far the ratings have been down, our performance has been low, and not many people are paying attention.
What going on?
I think they're down 16%.
Is it because we're busy? I mean, I like watching the Olympics.
No
I've
one's
been
busy.
so busy.
We have nothing
busy.
to do.
I think part of it, thank you, Jillian, I think part of it is it all happened yesterday. And
Right,
then
and we already
NBC
know.
runs it like, hey, look what's happening. I already have the answer. It's on my phone.
Let's just as a tribute to the Olympics, let's run yesterday's show.
Well, let's do a news channel. We try to do things live.
All right, it's 12 minutes after the top of the hour, and that is live. Still ahead, former House Speaker Newt Gingrich joins us live, Brian, to weigh in on this morning's big stories.
Plus, Fergie, no last name, now trying to explain that national anthem performance flop.
That our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star spangled banner yet wave?
All right, we've been telling you about the 13 Russians charged for meddling on Friday in the election, now indicted by Mueller's special counsel, a move our next guest blasts as, quote, ineffectual political and a political statement. Here to explain, former federal prosecutor Andy McCarthy, who's done a great job telling us what's next. Andy, what's next, and what do you mean by that statement?
Well, when you return an indictment that no one is ever going to be tried on, you do it because you're trying to craft a narrative or make a statement. And I think what happened with Mueller's case is the original collusion angle that they were proceeding on, which is that the Russians hacked the election and that Trump may have been, or Trump people may have been complicit in the hacking, is something that A, they don't have evidence of, and B, even if they had it, they couldn't prove in court because of, the fact that, number one, they never even took physical control of the Democratic servers. They basically contracted that out to a DNC contractor. So they'd have a hard time proving in court that Russia even hacked, much less that that Trump was complicit in it. So I think since that's a big hole in a collusion case, what Mueller probably wanted to do was put to rest any claim that Russia hadn't actually interfered with our election. And I think this indictment is an attempt to do that, but it's far afield from what the original collusion allegation was.
All right, so there's the foundation. Why would you do that? To set up a obstruction case? Here's the problem, here's the obstruction, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of problems with the obstruction case, not least that he doesn't have a statute that applies. You know, a prosecutor can't bring a case unless there's some federal criminal law that's been violated. And the U.S. Attorney's Manual, for example, says that a pending proceeding for purposes of the obstruction statute can't be an FBI investigation. So Mueller's been proceeding, or people who are behind the obstruction narrative have been proceeding along the assumption that what was obstructed here were FBI investigations, whether it's the criminal investigation of Flynn or the counterintelligence investigation of Russia's interference in the election. And for purposes of the criminal law, the problem with that is that it probably can't be the basis for an obstruction charge. Right. So you wouldn't, if you were a prosecutor, Brian, no prosecutor in his right mind would think he could indict the president anyway, because there's a lot of structural ways a president can get out of that. So I've thought all along this is really about impeachment.
So you want to just say, throw this, give Congress something to go on. So if the House flips to the Democrats, they'll say, yeah, I just don't like the way they acted during the election process, and we're going to go ahead and impeach?
Yeah, well, look, impeachment is something that the House has control over. The law is not. So, you know, they can decide what a high crime and misdemeanor is. Right. But Mueller needs a criminal statute violation, and he doesn't have one.
There would be a problem with that. I got two other quick topics for you. First, on Kushner. Word is that Mueller's interested in Jared Kushner may be expanding into his foreign business dealings. As it relates to the election?
Well, the problem with this, Brian, all along has been that there's no limitations on what Mueller can do. You're supposed to have a crime first and then assign the prosecutor to the crime. Here, what the Justice Department did was assign a prosecutor and tell him, you know, go on ahead and try to find a crime. So we can't really say exactly what he's homing in on because he's not limited that way.
And they've been pretty good at sealing up the leaks. Andy, your analysis is invaluable. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, straight ahead, a former college professor escaped from the PC culture on campus. Now he's telling it all. He'll be joining us next.
Now it's time for your news by the numbers. First, 75%, right there. That's how many young Americans are ineligible to join the military. 75%. A new study finding Americans aged 17 to 24 do not meet the minimum standards for enlistment due to all sorts of things: obesity, criminal background, or a lack of education. Next, 30 minutes. That's how fast Elon Musk wants to get people from New York to Washington, D.C. Half an hour. Washington Post reports his company has been given the green light to build a tunnel for a high-speed Hyperloop train. Experts predict it could take 10 years to build. And finally, $150,000. That's how much a Michigan inmate and author got as an advance on his new book of short stories. But now the state is coming to collect the money. The Attorney General says that money should be used to pay for his incarceration. But Curtis Dawkins, who's serving a life sentence for murder, wants to pay for his children's education. All right. Ainsley, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. In the new book, How I Escaped Political Correctness, and You Can Too, a former California college professor details her journey to leaving PC culture behind and writing, quote, I suddenly noticed my political correctness when I caught myself lying to my students about a simple matter of fact for fear of sounding right-wing. I also told myself it served the greater good, but now I saw that it served me. Once I realized that, I had a choice. You have a choice, too. Here now is the author of that book and founder of the Inner Mammal Institute, Loretta Brewing. Thanks so much for being with us, Professor.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hi.
Thanks.
Great. Well, so you had that aha moment when you were teaching. What led to that? What happened?
Many different experiences over the decades that gave me a moral quandary. In my dealings with students, cheating was widespread, and we were not really expected to do anything about it. And before that, I had a career in foreign aid with the United Nations, and there was a lot of corruption and bribery, and again, I was expected to look the other way. So all these things had frustrated me over the years, and yet this was my whole world. It was my profession. I was trying to be a good, member of a group that one learns to. But finally, when I couldn't deal with it anymore, was when I saw how it affected my children. And my mom genes kicked in, and I said, okay, this is not right. I'm going to do something else.
How was it affecting your children? What'd you see?
What I saw was, as you probably know, what it's called the Rousseauian fantasy, that children are born perfect and we just need to serve them and not have any expectations on them. This was sort of the belief system that I was surrounded by, and when I saw it not working, I tried to talk to people about it, and just nobody was on the same page as me. And then I found that other college professors were having trouble with their own children not wanting to do schoolwork. And I thought, wait a minute, we're telling other people how to raise their kids and it's not working for our kids? Yeah. So that made me decide that I needed to rely on my own judgment regardless of what the herd was doing. And that's how I effectively started studying herd behavior.
You said we need to take off the progressive goggles. So why do you think people fall into this PC culture, and what's the danger of doing that?
So that's what I was so curious about. Why would so many people follow this, including like highly educated people that I respected? And when I started studying the animal brain, I came to understand the real depth of our urge for a herd in the primal sense, in the mammalian brain sense, and in the human sense it's called a tribe. Now in the modern world we've chosen not to live in tribes, and so our mammal brain has this feeling that something's missing. We feel sort of insecure, and the more independent a life a person wants to have, the more they feel like something's missing. And political correctness is one way of meeting that need, and it gives you that sort of bonded feeling, so you always feel like you're part of something powerful.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor, for being with us. If you want to pick up the book, it's called How I Escaped Political Correctness, and you can too. Loretta Brewing. Thank you so much, Professor. She's holding up the book right now. Okay, have a great day. President Trump offering Mitt Romney a full endorsement as he runs for Senate. How long will the truce last? We're going to ask former House Speaker Newt Gingrich. That's coming up next. Plus, it looks like a scene from one of the Fast and Furious movies, exotic sports cars speeding down the highway. But that right there is real life, how their joyride came to an end. Just ahead.
Well, it is a lovely day temperature-wise. It's a little gray, but we're going up to about 65 here in New York City, and tomorrow 75 in the middle of February.
All right, I'm looking at this guy who's running to work. Someone's late.
Right. I just know all the cars are going in the right direction, and so is this show, which means it's time to go to Newt Gingrich, Fox News contributor, former Speaker of the House, and a former presidential candidate himself. Newt, welcome back.
Good to see you.
Good to be with you.
First time we're talking to you since the 13 indictments came down, which actually almost little notice. Next thing you know, Rod Rosenstein is coming out and say these 13 Russians were behind infiltrating into social media since 2014. What do you think of what has been declared so far, and what does it tell you about this investigation?
Well, I draw a distinction. I think this particular part of the investigation is very helpful. Mueller's doing exactly the right thing. My newsletter, which will come out tomorrow, both at Fox and at Gingrich Productions, talks about the real threat from the Russians, which is much more than just this. But there's no question the Russians today are the most aggressive big country in the world. North Korea probably is the most aggressive small country, but the Russians are pushing everywhere. President Macron of France has complained about them. So I think we need to recognize this is not a criminal investigation problem. This is a national security problem, and it's ultimately going to require a national security response.
All right, President Obama expelled those 35 Russian diplomats, closed the compounds that were in D.C., we all remember, and then issued sanctions. But the current administration right now, this president tweeted, Obama was president up to and beyond the 2016 election, so why didn't he do something about Russia meddling, insinuating he didn't do enough. Do you agree with that?
Well, look, I think it's fair to ask ourselves, if this particular project was as big as the news media claims it was, then why didn't the National Security Agency, or why didn't the FBI, why didn't the Central Intelligence Agency? I mean, somebody's supposed to pick it up. So you'd have to say to yourself, there's a long stretch in there where either the system broke down or we have a much deeper need to rebuild our security system. And this is not about Obama personally, but that whole structure, you have to say to yourself, if it was as big as Mueller seems to think it was, somebody should have noticed.
Absolutely right, because look where we are now. Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about this. There's a national conversation now about school violence. There's a brand new Washington Post poll out that shows, ask people, mass shootings are a reflection of what? Well, 57% say problems identifying and treating people with mental health problems, whereas 28% say inadequate gun laws. So it does look as if people, for the most part, a majority feel it's a mental health issue and not a we need more gun laws issue.
Well, my last newsletter, I outlined what I think is the only long-term solution, which is to have, depending on the size of the school, a minimum of 6 to 8 teachers and administrators who are trained in the use of firearms and have concealed carry permits and are prepared to defend the kids. You know, we've had this experiment. I thought the sheriff in Florida said it perfectly when he said, we've experimented with a gun-free zone. It's called a school. Every school in the country is supposed to be a gun-free zone. If gun control worked, how come it didn't work? And I think we have to be realistic. We're not going to confiscate guns on a scale to make us a disarmed country. And the truth is, sooner or later, somebody's going to slip through the net, because the civil liberties problem, if you go out and you pick up every person who's a little weird, you are really infringing on the right of people to be free, which is not to say the particular killer in Florida or the particular killer in Orlando earlier. I mean, there are people you should be able to track down, but it's not as easy and not as obvious except after the shooting.
Right, true. But there seem to be so many red flags here, and the FBI already admitted they dropped the ball. But here's an example of nobody I know watching, listening, looking at you are saying that Nicholas Cruz should have had a gun. But if his background check is clean, there's a problem with the background check. Don't you agree? Is there a way to weave in the police reports, which there were plenty? Is there a way to do that, to get that into the background check, so the gun owner doesn't feel like his life is ruined because he, on some level, might be complicit on this sale? So how do we stop the next Nicholas Cruz from getting a gun?
Well, first of all, you're not going to stop all of them, which is why I think we have to have some kind of armed defenders who are also school teachers or administrators in every school in the country. Second, I noticed that President Trump did strongly support what Senator Cornyn is trying to do. Senator Cornyn does have a bill which expands the gun check, and I think most Americans would agree with that. I mean, if you have somebody who is just blatantly, obviously nuts, they shouldn't be able to get a gun. This should not be a hard problem.
All right. Meanwhile, let's switch to politics for just a moment. We're going to put up on the screen a tweet from the President of the United States. Mitt Romney has announced he is running for the Senate from the wonderful state of Utah. He will make a great senator and worthy successor to Orrin Hatch, and has my full support and endorsement. Wasn't that long ago, Mr. Speaker, that the President of the United States had some unkind words about Mitt Romney and vice versa, but it looks like everything's patched up now.
Look, first of all, Mitt Romney's a very talented, very competent person. He is going to win the Senate seat. He will be a very important senator the day he walks in. I agree with Mitch McConnell. He won't be a freshman in any normal sense. He'll be a major player from day one. Second, if you can take the Romney-Bush moderate suburban wing of the party and connect it to the Trump blue-collar wing of the party, you then have, I think, an absolute governing majority. And neither one's going to win consistently without the other. So I'm delighted, and I hope that Governor Romney is going to come to Washington with the idea that he wants to be a person who helps unify the two wings of the party, not somebody who's going to stand up on one side and attack the other.
And Mitt Romney sent out a tweet as well thanking the president for his support. All right, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Great to be with you.
Isn't it interesting to see how much has changed over the last year?
Yeah.
They didn't like
Politics.
each other. Now they love each other. We were showing you the video of them eating at John George's.
He would have
Supper.
been Secretary of State. I mean, he was definitely a finalist.
Could have been.
He's
All
right
right,
up
let's
there.
hand it over to Jillian, who has some headlines for us. Hey, Jillian.
Good morning. A teenage girl once thought to be a robbery victim, now charged with setting up her friend. Police say 17-year-old Susan Mize planned a carjacking with 2 other friends in Texas. Those suspects accused of tying the victim up, threatening him with a gun and knife, and demanding money. Mize at first lying to police about the incident, but later telling cops the victim was an easy target. The NRA not backing down as the mayor of Dallas calls on the group to relocate its annual gun convention. The group issuing a statement saying politicians can't tell them not to come to their city. But Dwayne Caraway says the event is inappropriate in the wake of the Florida school shooting and points to past tragedies in Dallas, like the assassination of JFK. The NRA meeting is set to take place in May and draw thousands of people. Like a scene from a movie, exotic sports cars caught on camera speeding down the highway. Newly released footage out of Minnesota showing 2 Lamborghinis, a Ferrari, and an Audi clocking in at well over 100 miles per hour.
How fast you guys going?
What is it, 85?
Really? I got the first car in 394 at 110.
Jesus.
Yeah.
12 men were eventually issued tickets for misdemeanor reckless driving. Wonder how many points against your license that is.
Too many. Slow down.
Seriously.
Thank you very much,
How much
Jillian.
are those cars? That's my question.
They're
and who would
expensive.
spend that on a car?
Right. That's why I'm staying with my Chevy Vega. It keeps me out of trouble.
People who like to go fast.
Right.
All right, meanwhile, Janice Dean joins us. I believe she's out in the streets where nobody's going that fast.
No, speaking of going fast, you know that we have a big wheel coming up?
Yep.
I'm going to be riding it on the plaza later on during the 8 a.m. hour, so you want to stay tuned for that. And Steve Ducey, I heard you say 75 tomorrow. I'm going with 70. Let's take a look at the maps. We've got very warm air ahead of this cold front. There you go. You see where the cold front is? That's where we're getting the potential of freezing rain, a lot of rain, snow, and ice. Unfortunately, Kansas City, you have an ice storm warning in effect, so that's going to be concerning throughout the next, I would say, 6 to 12 hours as this front doesn't budge, and we're going to be dealing with flash flooding. And yeah, I mean, the good side of this is we're going to be dealing with warmer than average temperatures across the East Coast, but the bad news is the flooding concerns and the ice this morning. Stay tuned for more weather and big wheel racing.
Big wheel, keep on rolling.
Yes.
All right, Jamie, thank you.
Thanks, Janice.
All right, 18 minutes before the top of the hour. Still to come. Remember this teacher's anti-military rant.
They're not like high-level thinkers. They're not academic people. They're not intellectual people. They're the freaking lowest of our low.
Really? Calls are growing louder and louder for him to step down from a city council seat. The council's only veteran will join us live next hour.
And Democrats like Nancy Pelosi have called President Trump's tax reform bonuses crumbs.